There is a fruit tree growing in ancient groves scattered across the Mediterranean that has been producing abundant harvests, continuously for longer than most nations on Earth have existed as recognizable political entities. Some of these remarkable trees were already bearing heavy crops of fruit when Christopher Columbus first sailed westward for America in 1492. Others were fully mature and reliably productive when the Roman Empire was still centuries away from its eventual collapse and fragmentation. A few carefully documented specimens were originally planted during the time of the medieval Crusades and continue producing abundant, healthy harvests today. Over 800 years after the hands that carefully planted them turned to dust and were forgotten by history. This extraordinary tree appears more frequently in religious scripture than any other plant deliberately cultivated by humanity throughout recorded history. It provided the first clothing in human history, according to the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible. Its distinctive broad leaves covered Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden when they first recognized their nakedness and felt shame after eating the forbidden fruit of knowledge. Its sweet, nourishing fruit represented peace, prosperity, abundance, and divine blessing throughout the entire Old Testament narrative. Jesus himself used this specific tree as a powerful teaching symbol in parables and lessons that billions of people across dozens of centuries have studied, memorized, and contemplated. The tree requires almost nothing from the people who choose to grow it once it becomes established in suitable ground. It tolerates extended drought conditions that would kill commercial fruit orchards within mere weeks of water deprivation. It survives harsh winter freezes that completely destroy delicate citrus trees and tropical fruit species. It grows vigorously in poor rocky soil with minimal organic matter that would slowly starve apple trees and pear trees into unproductive decline. It produces 2 entirely separate harvests each year without irrigation systems, chemical fertilization, or pesticide application of any kind. Any gardener anywhere can propagate this remarkable tree completely free by simply cutting a branch and pushing it directly into the ground. The cutting develops roots within just a few weeks and begins producing harvestable fruit within 2 to 3 years of planting. A single mature tree can easily provide enough healthy cuttings to plant an entire productive orchard at absolutely zero cost beyond minimal labor. The simple mathematics of free, unlimited propagation mean that anyone who owns just one tree can have unlimited net trees forever without spending another penny on nursery stock or propagation materials. Your great-grandparents almost certainly grew this tree if they had any land at all. Every farmstead, every cottage garden, every monastery, and every estate across Europe and America included this tree as a standard provision. Families passed productive trees down through generations as living inheritance more valuable than furniture or jewelry. The fruit sustained communities through seasons when nothing else was available. Then the modern grocery industry restructured American food production around their distribution requirements rather than nutritional value or consumer benefit. This is the story of the fig tree, the biblical fruit that produces for 5 centuries from a single planting, and the commercial industry that stopped planting it because they could not figure out how to ship it profitably to distant warehouses. If this knowledge matters to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Let's begin. The biology of fig trees explains precisely why this remarkable species outlives and outproduces virtually every other fruit tree that humans have ever deliberately cultivated throughout agricultural history. Fig trees develop extraordinarily extensive root systems that access water and nutrients far beyond the reach of shallow-rooted commercial fruit species commonly planted in modern orchards. A mature fig tree sends its roots 20 to 30 feet deep into the ground, tapping moisture reserves that persist through droughts lasting months or even years without measurable rainfall. The tree essentially creates its own reliable water supply by reaching underground aquifers and moisture reserves that surface-dependent commercial orchards can never access regardless of irrigation investment. This remarkable root architecture explains why ancient fig trees survive and continue producing in regions where annual rainfall would not support any commercial fruit production whatsoever. The wood of fig trees possesses remarkable regenerative properties that allow individual trees to survive catastrophic damage that would kill virtually most fruit species outright. A fig tree cut completely to the ground will resprout vigorously from its surviving root system within just a few weeks of the damage occurring. Fire, flood, severe frost, construction damage, and even deliberate destruction cannot permanently eliminate an established fig tree. The tree simply regrows from whatever root tissue remains viable beneath the soil surface where damage cannot reach. This extraordinary biological persistence explains why individual documented specimens survive productively for centuries, despite wars, extended neglect, and repeated environmental catastrophes. Fig trees produce two entirely distinct harvests each year through a reproductive cycle unlike any other temperate fruit commonly cultivated. The first harvest, traditionally called the briba crop, develops on the previous year's mature wood and ripens in early summer before main season production begins. The second harvest, called the main crop, develops on current season's new growth and ripens in late summer through fall, depending on variety and climate. This dual production system effectively doubles the total harvest period compared to single-crop fruits like apples, peaches, or pears that produce only once annually. Pollination requirements for common fig varieties have been completely eliminated through thousands of years of careful, selective cultivation by generations of farmers. The varieties commonly grown in home gardens produce abundant fruit without any pollination whatsoever through a botanical process called parthenocropy. No bees are required for fruit set. No second variety is needed for cross-pollination. No pollination uncertainty affects harvest reliability. The tree simply produces fruit automatically whenever growing conditions permit, regardless of pollinator populations in the area. This complete independence from pollinator availability makes figs dramatically more reliable than any bee-dependent fruit crop, increasingly threatened by pollinator decline. Pest and disease problems that devastate commercial orchards rarely affect fig trees significantly. The milky latex sap that figs produce contains compounds that deter most insect feeding. The thick leaves resist fungal infections that require constant spraying in apple and peach orchards. Fig trees grown organically with zero chemical inputs routinely outproduce chemically maintained commercial orchards on a pea-tree basis. The historical importance of fig cultivation extends further back in time than any other fruit crop in existence and appears more prominently in sacred religious texts than any competing species ever cultivated. Archaeological evidence from multiple excavation sites confirms fig cultivation, beginning approximately 11,000 years ago in the Jordan Valley region of the ancient Near East. This remarkable date actually precedes wheat and barley cultivation by roughly 1,000 years, making figs potentially the oldest deliberately cultivated food plant in all of human history, rather than a secondary crop developed after grain agriculture was established. The earliest farmers in human civilization chose to propagate fig trees before they chose to plant grain crops for bread. Settled civilization itself may have actually begun with fig cultivation rather than cereal agriculture, as historians have traditionally assumed for generations. The Bible mentions figs and fig trees over 50 documented times across both Old and New Testaments of Scripture. Genesis describes Adam and Eve sewing fig leaves together to cover their bodies after eating the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The direct combination of fig leaves with the knowledge of good and evil places figs at the literal beginning of human moral consciousness. According to Judeo-Christian theological tradition, no other fruit or plant of any kind appears at such a foundational moment in scriptural narrative or theological importance. Old Testament prophets used fig trees repeatedly and consistently as powerful symbols of peace, prosperity, security, and divine favor. The memorable phrase, "everyone under their own vine and fig tree," appears multiple times throughout prophetic literature as the ultimate vision of security, contentment, and divine blessing. When prophets described future paradise and messianic age, they consistently described abundant fig harvests and productive orchards. When they warned of divine judgment and coming destruction, they described fig trees withering, failing, and dying. The fruit's immense symbolic importance directly reflected its fundamental practical importance in everyday ancient life. Jesus directly referenced fig trees in multiple important teachings, carefully recorded across all 4 gospel accounts. He dramatically cursed a barren fig tree that failed to produce fruit when he was hungry, causing it to wither completely, as a powerful spiritual lesson about productivity, faithfulness, and judgment. He used the budding fig tree as a prophetic sign of approaching seasons and coming events in his teachings about the end of the age. The remarkable frequency of fig references throughout his ministry indicates that his original audiences understood fig cultivation intimately from their own daily experience with planting, tending, and harvesting. Mediterranean civilizations built their agricultural foundations partly on fig production. Greek and Roman estates included fig orchards as standard productive infrastructure. Dried figs traveled with armies and trading caravans as concentrated nutrition that would not spoil during extended journeys. The fruit sustained populations through winter months when fresh produce was otherwise unavailable. The commercial destruction of American fig culture resulted from distribution economics rather than consumer preference or nutritional considerations. Fresh figs have a shelf life of approximately 2 to 3 days after harvest before they become unmarketable. This brief window makes long-distance shipping economically impossible using standard grocery distribution systems. A fig picked in California cannot reach an East Coast warehouse before it begins deteriorating. The logistics that deliver apples and oranges across continents simply do not work for fresh figs. The grocery industry requires produce that survives weeks of transportation, warehousing, and retail display. Apples can be stored for months in controlled atmosphere facilities. Oranges survive weeks of shipping from distant growing regions. Bananas are picked green and ripened artificially after reaching their destination. These durable fruits fit grocery logistics perfectly and receive corresponding investment in production and marketing. Figs receive no such investment because their biology does not accommodate grocery distribution requirements. Industry resources flowed toward fruits that generated reliable profits through extended supply chains. Marketing budgets promoted durable fruits that filled warehouse inventories efficiently. Agricultural research focused on extending shelf life for shippable species while ignoring locally consumed alternatives. The result was systematic elimination of fig trees from American landscapes over the course of the 20th century. Nurseries stopped stocking fig varieties as commercial demand declined. Agricultural extension services stopped recommending fig cultivation. Gardening publications stopped featuring fig growing information. The institutional knowledge that had sustained fig culture for millennia evaporated within 2 generations. Families that had maintained fig trees for generations watched their trees die without understanding how to propagate replacements. The simple technique of rooting fig cuttings, known to every Mediterranean peasant for thousands of years, became mysterious lost knowledge in America. Grocery store availability became the only criterion for fruit selection. If the supermarket did not stock it, Americans forgot it existed. The modern grocery fruit industry has overwhelming financial incentive to ensure that home fig production remains forgotten and impractical. Americans spend over $60 billion annually on fresh fruit purchased through grocery retail channels. That revenue depends entirely on consumers believing they must purchase fruit rather than growing it themselves. A fig tree that produces hundreds of pounds of fruit annually for 5 centuries represents catastrophic revenue loss for every grocery chain in the country. Industry has no incentive to remind you that free fruit is possible. The commercial fruit industry has consolidated around a small number of durable, shippable species that maximize distribution efficiency. Apples, oranges, bananas, and grapes dominate American fruit consumption, not because they taste best or provide optimal nutrition, but because they survive logistics systems designed for industry profit rather than consumer benefit. Figs, despite their superior flavor and historical importance, simply do not fit the business model. Grocery chains actively prefer that consumers remain dependent on purchased fruit throughout their lives. A family growing their own figs buys no figs from grocery stores. A neighborhood sharing fig harvests removes multiple households from the commercial fruit market permanently. The industry's ideal customer owns no fruit trees and purchases every piece of fruit they consume, from retail channels that capture margin at every step. Agricultural education has largely eliminated home fruit production from curricula that shape consumer behavior. Extension services that once taught fruit tree cultivation now focus on purchasing decisions. Master gardener programs mention fruit trees briefly while dedicating extensive attention to ornamental landscaping. The educational system produces consumers rather than producers. The fig tree waiting to be planted in your yard this season represents centuries of completely free fruit production that the grocery industry has systematically ensured you would never seriously consider as a realistic option for your family. A gardener could take a cutting from any existing fig tree and root it successfully in a pot of ordinary garden soil within just a few weeks at absolutely zero cost beyond minimal effort. They would plant that rooted cutting in any sunny location with reasonable drainage and basic soil. They would water it occasionally during the first year, while the root system establishes itself in its permanent location. They would then ignore it almost completely for the rest of their lives, while harvests accumulate reliably year after year for the remainder of their lifetime and the lifetimes of their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren after them. The productive mathematics of fig cultivation absolutely defy anything the commercial grocery industry can possibly offer consumers. A single mature fig tree produces between 50 and 200 pounds of fresh ripe fruit annually, depending on variety selected and local growing conditions. That remarkable production continues reliably for 200 to 500 years from a single original planting, requiring no ongoing purchase whatsoever. The grocery industry simply cannot compete economically with free, abundant fruit that outlives not only the customers who plant it, but their descendants for generations afterward. Every package of dried figs you purchase from grocery store shelves represents fruit that your own backyard tree would provided fresh and free in virtually unlimited quantity. Every dollar spent on commercial fig products represents money extracted from your family's budget by an industry that deliberately eliminated your access to this ancient and sacred food source. Every season that passes without a productive fig tree represents harvests lost forever that would have continued for centuries, benefiting generation after generation. Adam and Eve clothed themselves with fig leaves at the very dawn of human consciousness, according to Scripture that billions of people across the world consider sacred truth. Jesus taught profound spiritual lessons using fig trees as symbols that his audiences understood intimately from their own daily experience with cultivation and harvest. Mediterranean civilizations sustained themselves on fig harvests for thousands of years before modern food distribution existed. Your own great-grandparents very likely grew productive figs as a standard household provision that required almost no attention, produces 2 complete harvests per year without fail, requires 0 irrigation or chemical inputs once established, propagates completely free from simple cuttings forever, lives and produces abundantly for 500 years or more, mentioned over 50 times in the Holy Bible as a symbol of divine blessing and abundance. They stopped planting this ancient tree because your free centuries of fruit production permanently ends their paid decades of grocery store dependency. Now you know what every civilization from Eden to your own great-grandparents understood completely and practiced faithfully. Now you understand exactly why the grocery industry made absolutely sure you would forget this knowledge entirely. If this opened something important for you, subscribe and hit the bell. Every single like and share spreads what the $60 billion grocery fruit industry has deliberately buried to keep you buying their shipped, stored, artificially ripened, and heavily marked up produce forever. See you in the next one.